Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with our next lecture, which is how we change other people's minds. So, all right, if we really want to change somebody's mind, how do we do it? And so some of the things you might think is like, okay, maybe we give them more facts, or we find somebody that's an expert to talk to them. We use reasoning, maybe an emotional appeal or story, consequences to something. Show them that other people agree. Let them find out themselves. And it is all going to depend. And does giving somebody better information actually change their attitude or belief? The answer is no. The answer is no. Persuading somebody is going to be much more complicated. So w- we want to think that the correct information is going to change somebody's mind, but people are going to be very different in what they're motivated by, what they're willing to pay attention to, how much they trust the source, what is their identity. And honestly, beliefs do aid us in forming our identity. And so that's going to alter what we believe in as well. And how easily can we process information? So really, what determines whether a persuasive message actually works? And another question is, why can the same message persuade one person and completely fail with somebody else? So before we do that, we need to know exactly why we're trying to change, or what exactly we're trying to change. Forgive me. So we're trying to change an attitude, and this is an evaluation of a person, object, or issue. So it's favorable or unfavorable of varying strength. And examples of attitudes, again, they can range from negative, neutral, to positive, and they are dynamic. They can shift. But some examples are things like, okay, I like running. I hate reality TV. I like ice cream. I like Nike. I like or dislike all political candidates. I say I dislike all political candidates. I should say that. I'm in favor or approve of a social issue. You either like or dislike or don't really care about pineapple on pizza. So it has to do with how we think or what we think about something, how we feel about something, and then how we behave towards something. And it's not simply based on facts. So, these attitudes don't perfectly predict behavior, though. We'll talk about cognitive dissonance because we can believe that exercise is good and like the idea of it, but we don't do it. So we can think and feel something, but that doesn't mean our behavior is going to follow. So, yeah, are all attitudes equally important to us as well? Not necessarily, in that, like, I really don't care for pineapple on pizza, but it doesn't really drive my life. However, there are social issues that I'm very um driven by because they're very relevant to me and humanity as well. And so they're very much at the forefront. So there are different attitudes that are going to mean more to us than others. So if attitudes are going to vary, what determines whether a message changes one? And this is going to be persuasion. And there was a Yale attitude change study by Carl Hovland. And I know it's kind of hard to read the communication model in that image, forgive me. But it was a systematic study of persuasion. And the basic idea was that persuasion is not based upon just the quality of the argument. We need to consider the source. So, who's delivering the message to persuade? What is their expertise? Does the audience trust them? Honestly, are they stereotypically attractive? Are they like us? Do they live a life like us? And are they likable? Okay, then what is the message? How is it presented? Is there evidence? Is it appealing to emotion? Is it one-sided, two-sided? Is it repeated over and over? And then the audience, who are we targeting? Do they seem interested? Are they distracted? Do they know anything about this topic? Are they personally involved? Are they already committed? And again, you can have the same message, but with a different audience, you're going to get a different result. And so maybe you have a detailed scientific explanation of retirement investing. And so to a financial analyst, this could be very useful, but to a distracted 18-year-old, they probably don't care. It is not relevant to them. And again, it's not because one is smarter than the other. It just has to do with motivation. That 18-year-old is really not motivated in regard to financial planning for retirement, whereas the other person is. So it's just not relevant to them. So, what matters most? Is it the source, message, or audience? They're all, it's like nature versus nurture. It's an interaction of them. That's what makes it very interesting, is finding a good balance to target a specific audience on a topic. Um, but modern persuasion research did add another question above what Hovland studied. How much is the person actually thinking about the message? How deeply are they thinking about the message? And this is where we get into the elaboration likelihood model. This was created by Petty and Cacioppo. And in regard to this, all of us use both of these models. It has nothing to do with intelligence or anything else. We all use both of these models. What these models are indicative of is how much effort are we putting into it. So, this is the elaboration likelihood model. It's very important, and persuasion can occur through two routes in this model. The central route, this is when the person who's receiving the message is very motivated. They're thinking very carefully about the quality of the argument. They're motivated to take in the information. They're paying attention. And so the focus of the message is going to be on evidence and logic and a strong argument. And so some examples of this might be like, okay, buying a house. A message might include things like mortgage rate, inspection, taxes, location, comparable prices. Because you're probably going to have somebody who's highly involved and wanting to scrutinize the information. And so they will be taking that central route of persuasion. Okay, on the other hand, we have the peripheral route of persuasion. And this is going to be influenced by cues surrounding the message, not necessarily the message itself. And um, this is going to be applicable to people who are not necessarily as motivated. The message isn't as, relevant to them. They're short on time. They're not necessarily paying attention, and they don't need a very strong knowledge base. And so it's going to use shortcuts and cues, whereas the central route is using a lot of logic and evidence. Peripheral route is not. It's going to use shortcuts and cues to get the attention of the audience. Things like attractive people, celebrities. It's going to throw a bunch of different arguments at the audience. It's going to sound very confident. It's going to feel familiar. It's going to be emotion based. That's how they're going to hook people. And we can connect it back to automaticity and heuristics in that, again, not every decision is going to get deliberate processing because, again, we're being bombarded by so much information every single day. A lot of it is automatically processed. This is one thing that could be automatically processed. We could be persuaded to a certain degree unconsciously. And this type of message, it is cognitively efficient. And so the peripheral route doesn't mean somebody's lazy and it's not wrong. It's fast and it is very effective. And so it's an expertise. It can be a legitimate cue here. Is that okay? For example, I don't understand cardiac surgery, so I rely on an expert to just tell me. And again, that could be the central route, but also the cue could be irrelevant, and that's the peripheral route in that he's attractive, so the argument must be good. And that's enough to make that person a reliable expert. Okay, there is a big difference here in that the central route attitude change is usually stronger. It's going to be more persistent and more resistant to counter persuasion, again, because again, there's going to be system two thinking, there's going to be evidence, there's going to be logic, there's going to be more effort put into it, thus stronger behavioral change. Whereas the peripheral, it's going to be more temporary, susceptible to changing cues because it's going to be much more shallow in nature, even though that doesn't mean it's not more persuasive temporarily. So, what's going to determine which route we use? Okay, are we motivated to think about it? Okay, are we motivated is going to be based on, okay, is this even relevant to us? Does this even matter? Do I care? Okay, for example, the college announces that they're gonna increase tuition next year. If you're graduating this year, you don't care. So you're not motivated to think about it. But if you are returning next year, it's very relevant. Same message to two different people, and there's going to be two different types of processing because of relevance. Some other motivational factors. Are you interested? Is there any accountability on your part? Are there going to be any consequences for you? Also, ability. Do we have the ability to think about it? So you might care a lot about it, but you're distracted. You don't have a lot of time. Maybe you're just really tired. And honestly, if the message comes across as too complicated, you might not pay attention to it. For example, okay, you're trying to read like a 40-page insurance policy. Again, I care about that, but have I ever read through the entire thing? No. It's too complex. I don't know enough about it. And so I literally rely on my insurance company and the person who has my insurance. And again, we can go right back to automaticity. Our brains don't deliberately analyze everything, especially when our motivation is low and our ability is low, especially knowledge-wise, and so shortcuts are very efficient. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't care. It could be we care, but uh, I can't adequately evaluate this information for one reason or another. So, okay, example, we're choosing toothpaste, new toothpaste. Are we going to go with the central or peripheral route? Let's be honest. Probably going to choose the peripheral one. It's going to be based on the brand, packaging, dentist logo, familiarity, just a couple things. Like and I have an example. No, I don't. I have a Trident example. But if it says like, ooh, like the optic white, okay, that's going to catch your attention. Or you're going to improve your teeth by 10 shades of white in 5 days. Probably going to pick that one up. Or somebody else said this is a great toothpaste. Okay, we probably are not looking too deeply into our toothpastes, even though maybe we should. But okay, another example, you're deciding whether to undergo an elective surgery. Okay, now we're probably going to use the central route. But what if the medical information is extremely complicated? Again, there's 40 pages of stuff that we do not understand. There's statistics that we don't really understand. And so we might be really motivated to understand and take in the information, but we might actually need some peripheral cues. So you can mix and match these two together. So we might be motivated, but we also might need the confidence of the doctor. Where are we getting this done? Are we getting this done in Tijuana or at Johns Hopkins? Recommendation from other people. So again, it's not these aren't black and white things. They can cross into each other. And again, so the route isn't determined by how important the message is. It's determined by how the person processes it. Okay, so this gives us a prediction. If somebody processes it centrally, what is going to persuade them or peripherally? So let's talk about arguments, strong arguments versus persuasive cues. All right, so in regard to this, imagine your university is considering a new policy. All righty, all students must pass a comprehensive exam before graduating. And you hear a message supporting this policy. All right. So, but two things are going to vary. Okay. The argument, there's strong evidence and weak evidence, and the source, you have a prestigious expert and a less credible expert. So, what's going to influence you more? Okay. What's going to influence you more if the policy affects you next year? And we've kind of already talked about this. Probably the quality of the argument, the strong evidence, and the prestigious expert. Or if it doesn't take effect for 10 years, maybe a less credible source, it doesn't really matter. So, in regard to this, Petty and colleagues in 1981 conducted a study in regard to um, this exact same thing, and students heard a persuasive message supporting these comprehensive exams. And when the issue was highly relevant, again, this is going to affect me immediately. Students were influenced more by the quality of the argument. But again, if the issue had low personal relevance, they were influenced more by the source expertise. So, again, the same source, the same source arguments, different audience involvement. So, what happens if somebody's highly motivated and the arguments are terrible? The central route can actually make the persuasion less likely. And that's important because, again, deprocessing doesn't necessarily mean persuasion, it means careful evaluation. And if the argument is weak, we can detect the weaknesses. We're going to come up with arguments against it and actually reject it. So, getting someone to think harder about your message only helps if the message survives thinking. So, let's break this down. Okay, so back to Yale, the Yale study we talked about with Hovland. So, who says it? All right, one of the strongest source characteristics is credibility. Expertise is one of the major expertise and trustworthiness are the two major components here. So, do they know what they're talking about? Do they have the knowledge, training, experience, and competence? Yes, I put three people on here that I would say are all credible. Let's say that doctor is a doctor. Okay, I've got a mechanic here, and I've got Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So, all people who I would say are credible sources in their own realms. But expertise, yes, it is domain specific. Does being an expert in one thing make somebody an expert in everything? I probably, while God rest her soul, I probably would not have wanted Ruth Bader Ginsburg to work on my car. We're not doing that. It is very domain specific. So, as long as we have, again, somebody credible trying to persuade us within their realm and not something outside of it, usually we will basically take that on. Because again, a celebrity athlete talking about athletic performance, fine. But a celebrity athlete talking about complex financial policy or international policy, fame does not equal expertise. I've already talked about in this class how not a lot, some former professional athletes are running for public office with zero expertise. But for other reasons, it's persuasive for people to vote for them, apparently. Okay, then we have trustworthiness. Okay, so we've determined whether or not somebody is credible in their specific domain. Now, different question with trustworthiness. Even if they know the answer, do I trust their motives? So somebody might be knowledgeable, but are they financially benefiting? Are they hiding a conflict of interest? Are they trying to manipulate? And if they are, that's going to decrease our trust. We are seeing that a lot right now. And it's not necessarily that these individuals with the expertise, they are They are less credible in nature, but those around them are creating issues of trustworthiness. And so we're not necessarily trusting those around us as we have in the past because of, well, truly propaganda. And so there is kind of a push against expertise now. We're not trusting epidemiologists and judges and lawyers and medical professionals and researchers and scientists like we have in the past. And it's not because they're not trustworthy, it's because we're being told they're not trustworthy, which does require us to overcome that and do our own research. But unfortunately, what that results in are people is people not trusting these individuals, and thus they are not persuaded when these individuals who are highly credible give advice. Okay, because credibility is perception. We can create different standards for expertise and trustworthiness, but at the end of the day, it's all perception. And as a result of that, perceptions, again, they can be erroneous in nature. And unfortunately, um, even those who are not credible, again, because it's all about perception, we can ascribe expertise and trustworthiness on those who do not have credibility and actually start to believe them instead. Okay, so let's talk about this instead. Let's talk about attractiveness. So source cues beyond expertise. Again, so we're still the peripheral route. Attractiveness in ads. All right, so with attractiveness, okay, yeah, we might respond more positively to appealing sources. So yes, physical attractiveness again increase appeal, but again, it's strongest depending on the product and topic. Okay, so this might not work as well if we're talking about again like Bradley Cooper, I don't know, selling a financial policy for retirement. It might, but it's ice cream is better. You have Taylor Swift. Yep, Diet Coke. Will Ferrell, Cars. But again, attractive, likable. Similar, I don't know if any of these individuals are necessarily considered to be similar to the rest of us. This would be having quote unquote normal looking people in ads. And so we're like, oh, they live like us and can relate to me. Thus, this seems like somebody that must this is persuasive and I could see myself using this product. Okay, so again, ice cream, Diet Coke, cars, that makes sense for celebrities. But once you have a celebrity doing something like explaining statistical methodology, that's when we kind of should hit a roadblock persuasive wise, and that hopefully we want somebody with more expertise doing that for us. When it comes to likability, yeah, humor, warmth, charisma, familiarity. Will Ferrell. And, liking the source can spill over onto the message. I don't know anything about the Chargers, but now I'm paying attention because it's Will Ferrell. Similarity, again, somebody our age, experience, shared identity, someone like me. Testimonials. Again, student deciding for college, okay? An administrator can give statistics, and that's great, no, but it's really, and we do that here at this college, is we have student ambassadors also take students around on a tour because of this, because they have the ability to say, this is my experience and this is what it's been like for me. That similarity is much more of a sell than if me, as an older person, tries to do that to a potential student. And then the familiarity. Yes, repeated exposure. If the source becomes recognizable, recognition can feel assuring. Again, so if we're seeing familiar faces over and over and over again, And we'll talk about the illusory truth effect. Again, this is when a repeated claim feels more true, but we'll get to that. And again, we're not manipulated by attractive people, but if our motivation and ability are low and we use that peripheral route, these cues carry greater relative weight because they do get our attention. But when the central processing is high, we're highly motivated, we're highly able, these type of cues don't matter as much. So when we are persuaded, sometimes we're persuaded by what is said. Sometimes characteristics of the person saying it become part of the evidence. Okay, so that's who. Now let's move on to what they actually say. And is it persuasive? So effective messages do depend on more than simply having good facts, so to speak. How strong is the message? How is it framed? We talk about emotion, one and two-sided messages, and repetition. So, um, we already saw central processing. Yep, it does matter, especially with highly motivated and able individuals. It encompasses evidence, logic, quality. Um, Framing, we're going to present things in different ways. Same underlying outcome in order to persuade, but we frame it in different ways. So a simple example, okay? You might be able, you might have portray something as a 90% survival rate. Okay? That doesn't sound that bad. That's different than a 10% mortality rate. Okay, I'm cooler with the 90% survival rate. That 10% mortality rate, 1 out of 10 people are dying. I'm not as cool with that, even though it's the same thing. But there's a different psychological response. Possible, anyways. So again, it's about that subjective construal. It's how information is represented and then how we perceive it. And then we have emotion. What does the message make us feel? Can we use fear, hope, anger, guilt, humor? We can use all of those things to persuade people, but more emotion doesn't always mean better. So, especially with fear, threat and effective response, it can be otherwise you could have defensiveness and avoidance as well. Also, we have one and two-sided messages. We'll talk about those. And then again, repetition, which we will talk about with the illusory truth effect. Again, so persuasion, it's not about the magic me message. It's about what works for this audience under this condition. That's very specific. So, same facts, different reaction. All right, so with the framing, how is this message presented? Yes, medical treatment. 90% survive, 10 die. It's absolutely equivalent, but does it feel equivalent? We're looking at different aspects, gains versus losses. The objective situation is not the psychological experience. How the situation is represented matters more in regard to the perception of individuals. Okay, another example, if we're buying hamburger, 80% lean versus 20% fat. They put 80% lean on there. 95% employment versus 5% unemployment. Depending on upon what side you're on, you're going to use one or the other. Another example, save 20 bucks or avoid losing $20. You're going to say save $20. That's much more positive than talking about the loss, even if though we're avoiding it. And again, this isn't necessarily deception. Both descriptions are accurate, but the communicator can deliberately choose the frame, which changes what becomes psychologically salient here. And so, in regard to the persuasion, messages don't come across as facts necessarily. They're going to be selected, organized, labeled, and framed, and then perceived by us. And so, if both frames are true, like the survival and the mortality rates, which one should a responsible communicator use? And yes, the context, goal, and of course, ethics come into play, but we're not going to talk about ethics here. So how information is presented becomes part of how the information is experienced. And not only does it change how we think, but also how we feel. And that's where we're going to stop there because we just hit about the 30-minute mark, but then we'll come back with some more of this.